Well, another one bites the dust. Another journalist has quit a well-known outlet and cited censorship as the reason. This time it is Glenn Greenwald quitting The Intercept, which ironically is the outlet that he helped co-create about 7 years ago. And this over an article that he wrote about the Biden emails that he says that editors at The Intercept were going to censor. Interestingly, Barry Weiss quit the New York Times over similar complaints, though Greenwald has actually been a critic of Barry Weiss's, but they both quit their respective outlets for similar reasons. So I find that fascinating. If you're not familiar with Glenn Greenwald, he has been one of the foremost journalists of the last decade because he broke the Ed Snowden case, among other stories. The Ed Snowden case, of course, the files that Snowden passed to Greenwald and others from the NSA that showed that the NSA's surveillance program was underway, and Greenwald was one of the investigative journalists on that case, and that led to a slew of investigations. And so a lot of journalists have really looked for a long time towards Glenn Greenwald as a leader in the field because he has stuck his neck out on stories that frankly could have landed him in jail or even dead. But it's been interesting to watch how journalists in mainstream media have slowly started to sort of poke at Glenn Greenwald as he has become an advocate more vocally for free speech against, say, big tech censorship, for instance, and also for stories like this that he's written as a vocal critic of journalists and their coverage of what's often called Russiagate. This article he wrote called Beyond BuzzFeed, the 10 worst, most embarrassing U.S. media failures on the Trump-Russia story. Journalists who have looked at him as like somebody who's now just kind of like going off the cliff. And interestingly enough, I was wondering how long it would take as somebody who has a background in mainstream media, who used to work in television news, as I do these critiques of my former peers, how long it would take for somebody to call me also a conspiracy theorist. And today, folks, today I have been officially called somebody who is about to go down the QAnon rabbit hole. And I will tell you right now, I don't know a ton about QAnon. So if you're somebody who knows the nitty-gritty details about QAnon, though I know the basics, please leave me a comment about what my membership now entails. Do I have any Zoom meetings that I need to attend tonight? Like, just let me know, because obviously sticking up for Glenn Greenwald and just saying, hey, let's hear the guy out, this apparently now means I'm QAnon. So this is where we're at. We're going to get right to these articles, but don't forget there are links in the description for how you can support my work. You can become a Patreon, you can send me a PayPal, but it really does just help if you like, share, and comment, and subscribe to my channel. Hit the bell icon for notifications when I upload new videos. Let's get to this first article. It's titled My Resignation from the Intercept, the same trends of repression, censorship, and ideological homogeneity plaguing the national press generally have engulfed the media outlet I co-founded, culminating in censorship of my own articles. It says that the final precipitating cause is that The Intercept's editors, in violation of my contractual right of editorial freedom, censored an article I wrote this week, refusing to publish it unless I remove all sections critical of Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, the candidate vehemently supported by all New York-based Intercept editors involved in this effort at suppression. The censored article, based on recently revealed emails and witness testimony, raised critical questions about Biden's conduct. Not content to simply prevent publication of this article at the media outlet I co-founded, these Intercept editors also demanded that I refrain from exercising a separate contractual right to publish this article with any other publication. He says, I had no objection to their disagreement with my views of what this Biden evidence shows. As a last-ditch attempt to avoid being censored, I encouraged them to air their disagreements with me by writing their own articles that critique my perspectives and letting readers decide who is right, the way any confident and healthy media outlet would. But modern media outlets do not air dissent, they quash it. So censorship of my article, rather than engagement with it, was the path these Biden-supporting editors chose. Essentially, Glenn says that this issue is not unique to The Intercept, that actually he calls it a pathology or a virus that has infected what he calls every mainstream center-left political organization, academic institution, and newsroom. This is the statement that The Intercept has released about Glenn Greenwald's departure, and it reads, Glenn Greenwald's decision to resign from The Intercept stems from a fundamental disagreement over the role of editors in the production of journalism and the nature of censorship. Glenn demands the absolute right to determine what he will publish. He believes that anyone who disagrees with him is corrupt, and anyone who presumes to edit his words is a censor. Scroll down a little bit, it says, the narrative Glenn presents about his departure is teeming with distortions and inaccuracies, all of them designed to make him appear as a victim rather than a grown person throwing a tantrum. It would take too long to point them all out here, but we intend to correct the record in time. For now, it is important to make clear that our goal in editing his work was to ensure that it would be accurate and fair. While he accuses us of political bias, it was he who was attempting to recycle the dubious claims of a political campaign, the Trump campaign, and launder them as journalism. It's interesting, then they say, we have the greatest respect for the journalist Glenn Greenwald used to be, and we remain proud of much of the work we did with him over the past 6 years. It is Glenn who has strayed from his original journalistic roots, not The Intercept. And they end it with kind of a smack here saying, we have no doubt that Glenn will go on to launch a new media venture where he will face no collaboration with editors such as the era of Substack and Patreon. So kind of an elite snub at Patreon and those of us who have decided to go independent, but also mentioning collaboration with editors. And I do think it's a valid point to bring up that, say, having an editor doesn't mean that you're going to be censored. It's a process by which you try to arrive at the truth with somebody to help hold you accountable. That said, it sounds like Glenn had an agreement that he was not going to be edited unless what he wrote was going to serve as some kind of legal liability. So it depends on what his contractual obligations and vice versa, the Intercept's contractual obligations with him were, and I don't know the details of that. So whose version of the story is the more accurate one? Who's telling the truth here? I really can't tell you, but I will say I have always found it odd that people who are looked at as leaders in their field, whether they be a doctor or in this case a journalist, somebody who was seen as a intrepid critical thinker for so long, all of a sudden becomes somebody who, as the Intercept is referencing him, is a person whose narrative is teeming with distortions and inaccuracies. That somebody who they had trusted with all of this journalism over the years, that they had touted as one of their sort of headliners, really. I mean, Glenn Greenwald was one of the most famous journalists with the Intercept, that now he's looked at with skepticism. How somebody goes from trusted to dubious, I don't know how to make this connection, and it has happened in my career. I had a manager once who even said to me, I trust you on everything else that you do except for this one topic, and really it was because that issue and the way that I was interested in learning more about it did not fit that person's bias on that particular issue. And it was very clear to me that was what was going on. It wasn't that I had the biases. I wanted to ask some serious questions about this issue, and this person felt like those questions were reflecting my bias. I found that actually that person didn't want me to ask those questions because of their particular bias. Now, that's just my own personal experience. I don't know what happened in this case. Again, I just find it odd, not just with Glenn Greenwald, but, you know, even with COVID, as we've been looking at doctors, for instance, who have been seen as great healers over the years, are now all of a sudden looked at as charlatans if they speak out against the mainstream narrative. I find that odd, and that's just something to leave there. I, again, don't know what happened in this particular case. This is the article that Glenn said the Intercept was going to censor, and I'm not going to read you the entire thing. You can check out the links in the description, read to your heart's content. I'm also going to let you duke out the validity of the email story in the comment section, because what I'm really interested in here, since it's my background, is media coverage or lack of coverage of this issue, and what Glenn is saying was happening at his outlet of employment. So if you scroll down here, he has an excerpt from a Washington Post op-ed written by a guy named Thomas Rid, who Glenn calls one of those centrist establishmentarian professors whom media outlets routinely use to provide the facade of expert approval for deranged conspiracy theories. And the quote is, "We must treat the Hunter Biden leaks as if they were a foreign intelligence operation, even if they probably aren't." And that's kind of the interesting thing. I get that's part of what he's basically putting in this article about the media coverage, is saying that, like, that's how it was treated, even if there was no actual hard evidence that this was some kind of intelligence operation. In fact, if you read down here, he's talking about the journalists who actually just, tweeted or mentioned the story and asked for a response from the Biden camp, or, just put it out there asking for, there to be some kind of debate about it. And it said, a few mainstream journalists who tried merely to discuss these materials have been vilified for the crime of simply noting it on Twitter that first day. New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman had her name trend all morning along with the derogatory nickname MAGA Haberman. CBS News' Bo Erickson was widely attacked, even by some in his own media, simply for asking Biden what his response to the story was. And Biden himself refused to answer, accusing Erickson of spreading a smear. The NPR public editor, in an amazing statement representative of much of the prevailing media mentality, explicitly justified NPR's refusal to cover the story on the ground that, quote, "We do not want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, or waste the readers and listeners' time on stories that are just pure distraction." Now, I did a video earlier in the spring about how the Seattle NPR station was no longer going to carry Trump's coronavirus task force press conferences live. There was actually a tweet from a local NPR reporter that caught my attention because she says they are non-fact-checked horseshit marathon daily briefing spins. My response to that was, thankfully, plenty of other politicians' horseshit is still allowed. They were going to edit them for you so that they could figure out the disinformation and then, save you from hearing some kind of, wild falsehoods that President Trump was spreading. And I did a video saying that, I found that frankly dangerous, that reporters were just applauding that they were not going to show you the entirety of a press conference from the leader of the country. Whether you agree or disagree, or you think he's saying things are complete lies, let the American people see it. Let them see what he's saying, and then hold him accountable to that. Don't just silence everything. Again, to go back to my original premise, when you go at it with that approach, I really truly believe that you do not just silence these ideas, you send them deeper into these sort of holes of what potentially, maybe they're true, but maybe they become conspiracy theories. I mean, they remain essentially unchecked. So if you're a real journalist and you really want to do your diligence when it comes to a story that you find to be false, say you really believe this story is false, to me, the way to go at it is to argue the facts, not to ignore it. If you ignore it, it does not go away. In fact, as my husband says, bad news does not get better with time. So it's always better to just address things in life or in the media. And so it's odd to me that this is the way that some journalists think we ought to go. I'm going to show you a really quick clip of Glenn on Tucker Carlson's show talking about this. This was before we knew he was quitting The Intercept.
Is that the reason the Bidens aren't answering basic questions about this story? Basic questions like, did Hunter Biden drop that laptop off at that repair shop? Are the emails authentic? Do you deny that they are? Do you claim any have been altered or any of them fabricated? Did you, in fact, meet with Burisma executives as these emails suggest? The reason that they don't answer any questions is because the media has signaled that they don't have to, that journalists will be attacked and vilified simply for asking.
As I've been watching people discuss this story on social media, it is so clear political affiliation and which corporate news that folks consume. And I guess halfway through this video, I would just like to sort of throw that out as a, just a warning or just a plea of critical thinking. Because if you're finding yourself saying, I just can't believe people think that, or how could they possibly be so stupid, or you're just finding yourself super emotional about people not agreeing with you, it is highly possible that it's because the facts that you're getting on a particular story are entirely different than the facts that somebody else is getting on a story, depending on the media they consume. In fact, in this article, Glenn actually cites the New York Times, noting that, quote, most viewers of CNN and MSNBC would not have heard much about the unconfirmed Hunter Biden emails. CNN's mentions of Hunter peaked at 20 seconds and MSNBC's at 24 seconds one day last week. Whereas, of course, Fox News Channel has not only been doing, intense coverage of this, but they even had Tony Bobulinski on Tucker Carlson. You can see the link to that in the description as well, just to say that these different outlets cover these stories wildly differently in some cases. And so, yes, as a consumer of news, you need to be out there doing the best you can to be responsible if you so choose. But again, just be aware if you're finding yourself I just can't believe these people they don't agree with me. How could they be so dumb? How can they not see it? It's highly possible they're not seeing it because the facts just aren't there in the media that they're consuming. They just aren't there, and we are discussing totally divergent realities. So this is a public statement that was written and signed by a slew of former intelligence officials, and it's been used by some outlets to say, hey, see, nothing to this story, but I'm going to draw your attention to a very important point of contention here, because this is exactly why I think we need to continue discussing the merits of this story. And that is, though they say that it has all the earmarks of a Russian information operation, they say, quote, "We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement. Just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case." I'm going to say this one more time. We do not know if the emails are genuine or not. We do not have evidence of Russian involvement. Okay, this is what a journalist does. They take a case like this and they figure out if it's true, especially if you have intelligence officials saying, we don't know. And yet, this was used as an example for why we should just ignore the story. Interestingly enough, one of the signers of this letter was Leon Panetta, who was the Secretary of Defense and the director of the CIA under President Obama when Glenn Greenwald broke the NSA surveillance story with the leaked information from Ed Snowden. I'm going to end with a quote of Matt Taibbi's, another journalist, in this article by Glenn Greenwald that he says was going to be censored by The Intercept, and the quote is this: "The least curious people in the country right now appear to be the credentialed news media, a situation normally unique to tin pot authoritarian societies." So I'm going to leave it there. I do want to know your thoughts on the Biden email story, but more than anything, I want to know what you think about media outlets editorializing or even censoring information that you consume, and what you think the results of that are. Do you think that it's a good thing for news organizations to say, this is harmful for our audiences, so thereby we're not going to share it? Or do you think that does drive the potential rise of more entrenched and more radical thinking and even potentially conspiracy theories? Or do you think that's the right way to go? I also want to know, considering this happens on all sides, if you're somebody who consumes right-leaning news or you're somebody who consumes left-leaning news, would you like to have your organization show you stuff that may push your confirmation bias? I honestly want to know this because I do find on YouTube that people get kind of angry if I, for instance, present some data, some facts that don't go with one or particular political affiliation. I've even had people unsubscribe because they were like, I thought you were telling the truth. And I was telling the truth, I just didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. So I do wonder, do people really want to know the truth in 2020, or do they just want to know what their preconceived bias had already confirmed for them? And what do you think ultimately is going to be the result of increasingly divergent sets of facts being shared with different audiences by mainstream outlets like we have seen with this particular story? Because like I said, I've seen it on my own social media accounts. I can tell what corporate media people are consuming and what their political affiliation is by how they're reacting to this story in particular. So leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Again, the links to how you can support me are in the description, and I will see you next time.